periods. So let's just dive in. I'm actually going to light a candle. And if you would like to join me, you can, or you can just borrow my energy of my candle. Whew. My match snapped right in half. And as I light the candle, I'm setting my intention for sisterhood, for all those who will gather with us in the replay, and that we can all have the periods we deserve, the bleeds of our dreams, and really use them as a portal to remind ourselves of our worthiness and our infinite power. And so it is. Put my candle over here. Beautiful. Let's see. Okay, well, y'all know who I am, but for those who don't know, in the future time traveler replay, my name is Ellen, and I'm a divine feminine coach. I talk about things like menstruation, but also the cycle as a whole, the cycle of rebirth, the goddess archetypes, all these witchy things. And more than anything, I help women reconnect to their pleasure, their rest, and their community. Because in a toxic patriarchy, these are the lines of power that we are severed from. So that's a little bit about me. And you are so welcome here. So happy to have you in this conversation about how to have a better bleed. So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to start with the severing, is what I call it. And if you caught my sermon a couple weeks ago or last week, we talked about the witch wound. And a lot of that same wisdom and background is relevant for today. But if you didn't catch it, I highly recommend it. We cover how we were severed from our power, from sort of an evangelical, patriarchal colonialism perspective, and how it all kind of trickles down into a lot of the suffering that we feel today. Those of us in women's bodies, those of us who bleed. So we're going to talk about this severing, and then what I see as the path forward for reconnection, for reweaving our own healing, the ways we've been severed. How do we heal that severing? And in my experience, it is only through setting boundaries, which then lead to being able to relax, being able to rest, which is really hard in a capitalist society. And only then can we start to make some meaning. What does it mean to be in a body that bleeds, in a body that ovulates, in a body that has a cycle? What does it mean to be a woman? Yeah. And meaning making, you can also swap for the word witchcraft, if that's not too scary for you. And if it is too scary, again, go back. Let's talk about the witch wound. Okay. And then we're going to talk about health in your period. Your period and your cycle does not have to be a medical event. Number one, just like birth and death do not have to be medical events. And there can be some medical information that comes through, some relevant information from your period that we want to take note of. We want to be listening to our bodies. And then finally, we're going to integrate all of this together. And then, as always, I've got a little invitation. And if there's questions, I would love to answer them, or we can have a conversation. All right. So all the disclaimers, just threw them all together. I mean, y'all know I'm not a healthcare provider. I'm not Jamie. I'm not a nurse. But we've got a nurse in the house. And yeah. So in my view, this is from my experience as a person with a menstrual cycle, a person with awareness of my menstrual cycle. This is my experience as a coach, someone who coaches women around their menstrual cycles. But ultimately, your intuition, your experience, your body, your own wisdom trumps everything else. That's the big red rule that they talk about in their book, Wild Power, the founders of the Red Skull, which is an amazing book, highly recommend. It's called Wild Power. They call it the big red rule, and we have to keep that in the forefront. Anytime we talk about periods, anytime we talk about menstruation, menstrual cycles, ovulation, fertility, any of these things, right? You know your body more than anyone, and certainly more than I do. And then another disclaimer, not all women bleed. So maybe not even all of those watching this menstruate. Maybe they're on hormonal birth control. Maybe they've already ceased their menstrual cycle. Maybe for whatever reason, there's some gaps in their cycle. Maybe they are trans women who do not have a cycle. But then also we want to look to the other side. Not all who bleed are women. So a lot of non-binary folks, trans women bleed, trans men bleed. There's a lot more people who bleed than just women. So that's just something to be aware of when we have these conversations. And finally, we all need to keep at the forefront of our mind that there's different layers of privilege that intersect that create barriers to access. How can we have the best bleed possible when we are in poverty, when we are facing discrimination, when we're really afraid we're going to lose our income or our job, if we talk about our period because it's not safe, or if we set boundaries around work life in order to have a more pain-free, easeful period. So we're going to get into that a bit. And these are difficult conversations. I certainly don't have all the answers. And it's something to be aware of. I also don't want it to be a reason that anyone disrespects their period, pushes it under the rug, has less awareness of it, hates it. So let's have these conversations. And my door is always open to those conversations. So let's start with the severing. The severing. I'm going to take a sip of my watermelon kombucha. I'm so thirsty. Okay. So I don't know about y'all, but when was your relationship to your blood severed? What does this question even mean? I call the period the bleeding time a lot. So you'll hear me saying that, I'm bleeding. And that's because I want to center the blood. My experience is that I lose a lot of blood on my period. So let's talk about it. But in terms of your period, your menstrual cycle, when was your relationship to it severed? Did it happen long before you ever had your first bleed? Was it at your first bleed? Was there some pivotal experience where you were shamed for being a person who bleeds? Or it was subtly communicated to you that you needed to hide it? You needed to fear it? Maybe it's something that happened way before you were even born. You even came on the scene, right? And that's ancestral shame that we carry. And I don't know about y'all, I've had some Reiki sessions, some energy healing sessions where people have said women carry this kind of trauma, this kind of ancestral severing in their ovaries, in their uterus, in their hips, really in these areas, in the vagina itself, in the genitals, in all of these areas. We carry trauma. We carry the trauma of our ancestors. We carry the stories, particularly of our maternal line, our matrilineal line. And so learning these stories and having the courage and the space in the body to hold them and to heal them can be incredibly transformational on this journey. But that's a little bit about the ancestral piece. where does all of this come through culturally and societally? Well, we know our creation myth, the dominant creation myth of the dominant religion, which is Christianity here in the West, is that Adam and Eve were in a garden, everything was perfect, and then Eve went and fucked it all up, and then she was cursed with menstruation, right? That's the myth that we've inherited, that we bleed because we were bad. And not just because we were bad, but because we wanted the knowledge of good and evil, because that's the fruit of the tree that she ate from. And I mean, there's so many levels here to like unravel and heal and really look at, right? Like, how dare a woman try to know all that there is to know? But just reflect on how that story, if that's part of your own story, because I think whether or not you were raised in the church, that trickles down, right? Because it's the dominant myth that affects us in some way. So we've got Eve, then we've got the witch wound, because literally there were the burning times. So my ancestry comes from old Europe, and this is predominantly where the burning times happened, where mostly women, but also men, were tortured and killed because of their knowledge of the body, their knowledge of things like birth and death and menstruation, right? Their knowledge of working with plant medicines, their knowledge of ritual and healing and ancestral connection, their spirituality that wasn't in line with the dominant again. And so they were made to pay for it. How does that, even if you didn't know that story, does that bring anything into focus hearing it now? The fear of coming out of the broom closet, as we call it, as a wise woman, as a magical person, as a person who believes in animism and believes in magic and working with the body's wisdom. Because really, to me, what it means to be a witch is I'm willing to look inside of myself for the power. I don't have to look outside of myself. And all of this relates to menstrual cycle awareness, because your blood, your period, is one portal through which you begin to strengthen that intuition muscle and say, oh, I can be trusted. Actually, I have some power. I know a thing or two. Very dangerous for our ancestors and for many women today. Still very dangerous. And so all of this history, all of this context, right, leads to period shame, shame around just being a woman, period, like at all. And period shame is body shame. Like, make no mistake, any kind of shame around the blood, any kind of shame around talking about cramping or talking about a need that you might have that someone who doesn't bleed won't have, that is all body shame. And so then the reverse is also true, that the more we love our period, the more we love this special time each month, the more we love our cycle as a whole, the more we're loving our bodies. And we're starting to heal some of this severing, some of this ancestral cultural stuff. And so this brings me to what I call the square peg round hole. Like, given all this context, given all this shame that we have around the period, around the cycle, culture was set up for a male body, right? We know this. We know that the 40-hour work week, the 24 was based on the 24-hour hormonal cycle of a male, right? Because women weren't in the workforce. Women weren't leaving the home, right? For many of our ancestors. And so when they did, they were put into this sort of square peg, round hole situation. They didn't fit in to the modern day work life situation. So if you've ever felt like your monthly cycle of rising and dipping energy levels and pain levels doesn't fit your kind of work calendar of showing up Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, being the exact same person every day, every week, every month, every year, it's because you weren't meant to fit into that. It wasn't designed around a monthly cycle, right? So we've inherited all of these logistics on top of all the shame and bullshit. We've inherited these logistics that were set up for a male hormonal cycle. And then we are made to feel like we're the problem. Like there's something wrong with us because we don't fit in. We don't fit in to the logistics and the structure. Because we're not the same every week. We are different people every week when we have a menstrual cycle. And this sort of brings me to this idea of pathologizing our pain, pathologizing the period, because if we don't fit in, we are the problem. And our periods are just an inconvenience. They're that thing that makes us different from a man. And if we're less than a man, and the period is the thing that makes us different, then the period is the problem, right? So all of the pain we might experience at our period, all of the needs we experience, and we have very different needs when we're on our period. We have different needs for rest. We have different needs for nutrition, different ways to move our body, all of these things. It pathologizes those needs and it makes us want to keep them to ourselves. Like, oh, I'm bad for having these needs. I need to make sure that I keep it under the rug to not make any man uncomfortable and to not give myself a disadvantage in a world where I'm measured against the male worker, for example. This is like all from a very capitalist workplace scenario, but it's a lot of our lived experiences, and it certainly was mine. I used to work in women's rights with mostly women, and there would be like two men in a room, and someone would mention a period, and then everyone would look to the man to make sure he was comfortable. Like, so if that was happening there, I know it was happening everywhere else. Okay. So that's the severing. And this is the bottom line. If we believe that we can't handle pain, we will avoid what's just on the other side of that pain, which is all of our power, right? And we're really good at avoiding pain, aren't we? We're really good at avoiding discomfort or feeling anything at all. And if we're afraid of what's on the other side, if we're afraid of that power, then we're never going to be able to channel all of the sacred rage that we feel. And women feel a lot of sacred rage for all the shit I just mentioned, for all of the ancestral stuff, for all of the social and cultural stuff, all of the patriarchal, misogynistic bullshit we've inherited. We have a lot of sacred rage. And you better believe patriarchy wants us to be afraid of our power so we don't channel that rage in ways that upset the status quo. So every bleeding person has the potential to shift our world into greater alignment. And maybe you've experienced some of that power, some of that sacred rage, especially just before you bleed, that like premenstrual, fiery self. Imagine if you had an outlet for that rage, for that power, that was transformative. Because you are a bleeding person. You have the capacity to bring life into the world, which means there's a flip side, right? And just on the opposite side of ovulation is the bleed. It's that life, death, life, death, life, death cycle that you contain in your body. You better believe that's going to open a fucking portal into transformation for our world. You are a powerful being. And it's time we claim our power and we stop letting the world hide it and make us ashamed of it, which is even worse. So let's get into it. All right, this is a little thing that I put together. This is you on one side. This is the period. Like all these pieces are at play when you're on your period. Oops. And then this is your power. These are all the things keeping you separate. Cultural shame, the fear, tension, pain cycle, which we're going to talk more about. And then all the social inequality that I mentioned in the beginning. All these things keep you separate from your power. But what cuts through them and what we're going to talk about today is your awareness, your intention, and your aligned action. Today, you're going to have more awareness for being here. You're going to set some intentions around your next period or all future periods that you will have. But the action piece, this aligned action you will take, that's up to you. Some of you won't take any action or make any changes for your next period. But some of you will, and you'll start to grow in your own power to have not just a better bleed for you, but to become an example for those bleeding people in your life of what a period can look like. So we've talked about the severing. This, as I said, is my recipe for reconnection. It starts with boundaries, and that's the hardest part. A lot of us say relaxing and resting is the hardest part in a capitalist society. And I agree, it's hard, but it's only as hard as you're unwilling to set boundaries. Your ability to rest, to relax, to what some people tell me, shut off their brain. Your ability to do that is in direct proportion to your ability to set boundaries and your courage to set boundaries. So we're going to talk about that. And then your ability to rest and relax is in direct proportion to the meaning you're able to make from your period. The visions you receive, the inspiration, the creativity, all of the magic that is possible when you are bleeding. That's the power that was on the other side of those 3 lines that I just showed. The power comes from when we are able to make meaning. All right. So let's start with boundaries. What I said was the hardest part. And I call this cycle sovereignty. If you took Homecoming, the challenge I offered several months ago, we talked a lot about your sovereignty, right? Sovereignty is a 2-way street. When you believe you are sovereign in your life, you are the one who is responsible and capable to handle whatever comes your way and to make it the life of your dreams, you give others the permission to do the same. So when we talk about cycle sovereignty, we're talking about the inherent power to fully inhabit, claim, and work with every season of your menstrual cycle as you see fit. To inhabit, claim, and work with. So to tell the world, I'm bleeding, I'm on my period, I'm menstruating, whatever you say, to have the courage to speak it, and then to inhabit it, to be there, to not push it away, to not resist it, to not hide it, and to work with, to receive the medicine of that phase, which The period is just one of 4 phases in your menstrual cycle. And if you're curious about all 4 phases, I highly recommend you come to Free to Flow, which Jamie and I are doing next month. But for today, we're just talking about the bleed, which is the inner winter. And, it's a season that most of us have the most complicated relationship with. People who love their period are people who have probably been doing this work at some level for some time. But this is my definition of cycle sovereignty. And every boundary we're going to set for our period is a boundary to pull us into greater alignment with our cycle sovereignty. It's necessary. If you see a picture of a woman who has a great period, I guarantee she is setting all kinds of boundaries with her work, with her partner, with her kids, with her hobbies, with whatever, with her community, everything. So how do we practically do that? So work in your period, this is the most difficult piece. And when we talked before about privilege and access, this is really what I was talking about. Every job looks different. However you get your income, it's going to look different on your period. So what can you do? What boundaries can you set? Everyone can set a boundary. Maybe it's when you're at work and you're on your period, it's setting an intention for how you want to be. Maybe you don't want to say yes to any extra work. Maybe you want to create a really yummy space in your cubicle or your office. Maybe you want to put your headphones on so no one bothers you. Or just give a little less effort, a little less energy. Give yourself permission to do this without the fear that you're going to get fired, you're going to lose your job. And actually see what happens, see what the outcome is, or have those difficult conversations. For some of us, it's having paid time off or the ability to work from home on days 1, 2, maybe 3 of your cycle, maybe not every month, maybe just a couple times a year, once a year. I know women who have a big bleed twice a year and it has changed their lives, myself included. A big bleed is when you don't do a damn thing on your period and you take a vacation or you stay at home, you make it a staycation, but you literally do nothing. You do no work. You delete social media. You set all kinds of crazy boundaries. And you really soak up the magic of this time. I mean, imagine someone in their 30s, 40s, 50s who's never done this, who goes away for a big bleed. I mean, the amount of healing that can happen from all these years of horrible periods, lots of menstrual shame, just going away once for 3 days when they're bleeding. It can have a huge impact on your life and on your relationship to yourself as a person, as a woman. That's a big bleed. And if you got the workbook for this webinar, there's a whole section that is borrowed from the Free to Flow workbook that is about creating that big bleed for yourself. And maybe you design it and you're like, I can never do this. I'll never be able to take it. How can you just give yourself 1 teaspoon of that medicine at your next bleed? I can't tell you what that looks like for you. And we're going to talk about creating the period cave. Maybe that's the answer. I know that's helpful for a lot of women. Maybe you just need to give less fucks at work. That's always in your control. And that's the beauty of periods. We have this built in once a month, this free pass to rest, to only send that love and that care inward. It's also a magical time for creating and envisioning. So if you have control over your work projects, if you're a business owner, if you're a manager, whatever it may be, it's saving those projects that take more visioning and more creativity for when you start bleeding. Maybe like day 2, day 3, not so much day 1. Day 1, I just want you to rest as much as you can and then see what's possible. So that's work. We're going to talk about home now. And I know a lot of us have partners, have kids, have a lot of responsibilities in the community, have, crazy home lives, and are probably thinking like, this is great for, a single woman bleeding alone at home, but what the hell does it have to do with me? I think the more people in your household, the better, because there's more support that you can ask for, but it does take more communication. It takes a return to the village model, which capitalism has all but killed. It takes a lot of courage to say, I need support, and to just say, this is my experience. I'm bleeding. I need some help. I'm not going to cook dinner every night, It's bringing more into alignment these gender norm disparities that a lot of us have been living with, that our ancestors lived with. Maybe we saw our mothers suffer under. What could reclaiming this bleeding time do for the gender disparities in your partnership? Or maybe you're in a partnership where you both have a cycle and you both bleed. What kinds of communication is necessary in that partnership? And when you have kids, it's so great to invite them in to this aspect of your life, to teach them from a young age not to be afraid of the blood, what it makes possible, them, all of humanity, and that you as a bleeding person need and are worthy of more rest, more care, more nurturing when you are bleeding. And again, in that book, Wild Power, I mentioned, they talk about raising the red flag. It's this idea that you can have a group of bleeding people to rely on for support when you're menstruating, to help with the kids, help with the cooking, help with the cleaning, or just to let them know, I'm bleeding. Can you witness this? Can you just light a candle for me? I am a doula in addition to being a coach. And when someone gives birth, these are also things that they need. So you can think about, how do you want to doula yourself through your bleed every single month? Like a mini doulaship. Because every period is a portal. And it has the power to be life-changing, just like a birth. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't have kids. And I do have this sort of fantasy of having a home birth someday, and you can envision the candles and the quiet and the darkness, pulling the curtains over the windows and creating this beautiful magical space, and having everyone's support, like a circle of women around you with all of their wisdom of how it's done and the old ways, having them make you soups and drawing baths for you. It's one of those last holdouts from the village that we still see, is when someone chooses to birth at home. It's so beautiful. And I think about this in relationship to the bleed, because you can give yourself and ask for a little bit of this kind of nourishment every single month. It's built in. You are worthy of these boundaries. And the last piece on boundaries I want to touch on is the MVP, the minimum viable product. So I love working with this idea when I just feel overwhelmed. There's so much I have to get done. There's so much on my list. I ask myself, what has to get done today? Can I take a little more off my plate? Like, what's one more thing I can get off my plate? What's one thing I can delegate? And I love to just have 3 or less on my bleed days. Actually, every day I love to have 3 or less. On my bleed, I like to have 1. And it's usually like feed the dog so she doesn't die. And like feed myself, obviously. But I want you to borrow this concept from me, because it's so easy when we build our identity on how long our to-do list is to say, oh, I really can't let go of anything right now. But your bleed, again, it's an opportunity to unlearn some of these behaviors that capitalism has given us, and to say, I can do less and still be worthy. And I deserve this. Yeah, it's really hard though. The MVP. Let me know what you think. And then also, we're making no our new favorite word. Just as our productivity is not our worth, our availability is not our worth. You do not have to be available to everyone all the time. Use your period as a time to practice this. Remember that sovereignty is permission giving, as I said before. It's a two-way street. And always acknowledge your blood. Always tell people that you're bleeding. Just start with one person this next bleed and see what happens. Okay, so that's boundaries. Boundaries give way to relaxation, right? Periods don't have to be painful. So I am a hypnobirthing coach and doula. And something that the hypnobirthing practice has taught me is that all of our pain is a physical manifestation of fear and tension and stress in the mind. Your period doesn't have to be painful. And that doesn't mean that when you have pain that you're bad because you allowed yourself to be stressed or to have fear or to have tension. But it's just a sign that maybe you can relax a little bit. And relaxation is a practice. It's something we practice every day of the cycle, 365 days a year, so that when these times come, when the blood comes, we've already been strengthening that relaxation muscle. We're getting better and better at deploying it. And then it's also an opportunity to heal internalized capitalism, which I've mentioned a few times. When you relax, doesn't mean you're morally bankrupt. I think we feel like, number one, we feel like we have to do and be available to everyone in order to be worthy, because our greatest fear is that people will leave us. But there's also a fear of pleasure, of rest, of doing nothing. That's just more of a moral anxiety that we have. So I want you to watch that, notice it, how it arises, and have the courage to do nothing on your period. Period cave time. I love these pictures so much. It's like my personal period cave Pinterest board. Your period cave, your sacred space where you go when the bleed begins. Maybe it's your bedroom, maybe it's the living room, maybe you have a yurt out in the yard. Wherever it is, make it dark Bring lots of elements of red inside. Light lots of candles. Use very little electric light. Bring your supplies. Bring your tarot decks, your journal, your favorite spiritual books, or your fiction, whatever you're enjoying. Bring your cacao, your dark chocolate, your tea. Bring whatever you need, your yoga mat, your pillow, your blanket. Make it a nourishing womb-like space. And set some intentions around it. Like when I go into this cave, I'm not bringing my phone. Or maybe I'm bringing my phone, but it's on airplane mode. Maybe I'm letting someone know I'm going in and they can field all my calls. I'm going to be unreachable for at least the first 24 hours or whatever you can do. It's always great when you get your period on the weekend and you can just really switch off fully. But obviously we can't plan that. So just using this space, this dark, regenerative, healing, womb-like space for our inner winter, our period, to represent the divine feminine, that winter darkness, sleep, right? Healing. We must take this time for all that it offers us in order to be at our peak on the other side. In order to have that full spectrum cycle and all the benefits it contains, it all starts here, day one. Your choices on day one will impact your entire month. And honestly, I can usually get people excited about the period cave. Like they want to make their red tent. They want to gather all their little witchy supplies. They want to have a period altar to the crone goddess, who we're going to talk about. Like they can get into the idea of it. So let that be your inspiration. Maybe this is where you start. Maybe today you carve out the space or you gather the materials and you start to get inspired. Let your mind run away with that imagery and then make it happen. See what's possible. Okay, so we've got our period cave set up. We've got our boundaries set. I really want you to aim for 9 or more hours of sleep when you're bleeding. If you can't do anything else, carve out the time to at least be in your cave or your bed for 9 hours. If you can't do anything else, can you carve out that 9 hours? And even if you can't sleep, can you be there in your cave, in your space, resting, just resting? And we're not going to be like running. Jamie knows this. We're not going to be doing our big strength workouts on our bleeding days. Jamie says she rolls around on her yoga mat. I love that. Like, yes, we're doing the gentlest yin yoga. We're doing yoga nidra, which is basically you're just lying there. It's awesome. We're tapping. We're doing fascial release and self-massage, like the simplest things you can imagine. And we're taking easy nature walks. This is the level of movement that we're getting on our period. So we've set our boundaries, we're relaxed, so we're having less painful periods. And now we're set up to make some meaning. This is the good stuff. This is what we've been working toward. This is the meat that we're getting into on our period. So what is witchcraft? I say it's when we make meaning. It's when we intuit from the universe, from source, from God, goddess. It's when we are creating from that inspiration place and we're making meaning. We're giving back. We are expressing our experience. We're connecting. We're healing that severed connection, right? So let's start with intuit. When you're rested, when you're resourced on your period, I promise you will meet that power that was just on the other side that I talked about in the beginning. And that power is the divine. It is universe. It is goddess. It is in you. But you have to be even on like a resourced plane to meet it. And many of us have never experienced that. We've only experienced pain, trauma, grief around our period. So once we're resourced enough, we're going to actually meet the divine. And the divine meets us. And we can hold it. Have you ever been given really potent visions on your period? I have. And the more menstrual cycle awareness that I brought, the more I was able to see. And sometimes I'll just ask, like, show me what I need to see. Show me in vivid dreams. But usually on my period, it's daydreams. It's like I'm awake, but I can see these things when I'm resting in my period cave. I can see visions of my future. I can see visions for the world. I can see how I need to help someone. You can think about the thinning of your uterine lining. They talk about this in Wild Tower again as the thinning of the veils. You know, like how the Celtic ancestors talk about thin veils. You're closer to the other realm. You're closer to ancestor. You're closer to the divine. And it's the same with our period. It's a very spiritual experience. And I want you to start journaling when you're bleeding with a red pen and just being open to whatever wants to come through. It's amazing when we don't distract or numb ourselves, what is able to come through. And actually believe it. This is your intuition. This is your wild power. This is your magic. Sometimes I don't have the energy to write when I'm bleeding, so I'll just open a voice memo and just start talking. I've got so many on my phone that I need to go back and listen to and actually like transcribe. But I've had so many amazing ideas for my business. And it's the power of letting the vision come through without the pressure of acting on it that the period really gives us. So give yourself that gift to receive the vision without feeling the pressure to make it all happen. That's what the other phases of the menstrual cycle are for. This phase is just about gathering the data, downloading the wisdom. Okay, that's the intuit. Then we get to create. And if you have any energy on your cycle, I want you to create for the purpose of pleasure and joy. Not for the product. Nobody has to see it. This is just for you. It's so powerful once you've received the vision to start creating. It's like you're co-creating with the goddess. And then finally, do some rituals. I'm going to give you some ideas in the slide deck, but do some rituals. Make your own rituals. What do you do when the blood comes? How do you make meaning? How do you make your experience inside, outside? How do you reweave the severed connection with your ancestors, with the earth, with your body? And I've got lots of ideas, but I really want you to create your own. There is nothing more powerful than making up your own song, saying your own spell, saying your intention out loud. It's that simple, y'all. We are powerful. We are worthy of the woo-woo. These are some starter ideas. I am going to give you the deck. I'm not going to go through these. Just some ideas of what you can do when you're bleeding. These are some more advanced ideas. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out. I would love to talk to y'all about this. And then finally, we come to the health of our period. Because sometimes things are off. I mean, I was just saying at the beginning, like, I just had the most difficult period I've ever had. It can be a sign that you experienced some sort of trauma in the last cycle. It can be a sign that you've experienced more stress, more fear. Maybe you've been going through a transition, in my case, all three. But it starts to make sense. You can connect the dots and be like, oh, yeah, that's why I lost so much blood, or that's why I had so much pain. But talk to your healthcare team, right? If something feels off, if you're feeling lightheaded, dizzy, if you know something's not right, it never hurts to kind of gather your people, gather your team around you and track your cycle, because they're going to want to know. Like, all this awareness only serves your health ultimately. So the first day of full bright red blood, that is day one. Everything else from there, count forward. Maybe you have longer cycles like I do. I was having 36 to 40 plus day cycles during COVID. And just recently, the past 2 or 3 cycles have come back into rhythm and actually aligned with the new moon, which is really beautiful. It makes me feel like something good is happening for me. This is like very personal. Don't shame yourself if you don't bleed on the new moon. Dear Goddess. But it's cool that I get to experience that now, because it's even more potent for me, the new moon energy, and then ovulating with the full moon. Whereas I used to have a flipped cycle. I used to always bleed with the full moon and ovulate with the new moon. So it's just interesting. It doesn't mean you're bad, good. It's just, let's be curious about it. And then again, I'm going to send you the deck. I know we're almost out of time. These are my go-to things around nutrition and the period. Definitely recommend all the dark chocolate in the world, and studies show that it limits the pain factor of cramps because of the magnesium. But all of this is good. So what I want you to do now, I know we don't have much time. If you want to grab a piece of paper, you can, or maybe we just take a moment to pause and take a deep breath. Let it go. Feel your body. Maybe place your hands on the womb. Just notice what's going on. How is she feeling? Just threw a lot of information at you. I want you to set an intention for your next period. Maybe you know when it's coming, maybe you don't. When it comes, how do you want to feel? What boundaries do you need to set for your next period? How will you prepare? Are you committed to tracking your cycle? When will you start? If you had your eyes closed, you can open them. You can grab some paper or take a note on your computer or your phone. Just write down anything that came up for you, anything you want to commit to, anything you saw. And after your next period, I would really encourage you to reflect on these questions. You're going to have the slide deck, you're going to have the workbook, you're going to have the recording. You've always got me in your corner. But I want you to reflect, like, how did it go? These are the questions I want you to ask yourself as part of your tracking. How were your boundaries? How was your relaxation? Like, were you able to relax? How was your pain? How heavy was your flow? And then how were you relating to your period and to being a person with a period? Was it still an inconvenience? Or did you notice something new? What needs and desires were met? What needs and desires were not met? What needs to shift for the next cycle? And what support did you need? How will you get it next time? All right. Sorry, we've gone a little over. Obviously, I want to invite everyone to Free to Flow. So Jamie is here. Hi, Jamie. And we are going to have this amazing day to talk about all this stuff, but really all 4 seasons of the menstrual cycle. And it's going to be so beautiful. Jamie is not only a nurse, but also a yoga teacher. And so she's going to be leading us in some beautiful flows for the different seasons of the cycle, talking about how to move our bodies throughout the cycle. And I'll be covering more of the self-care and the spiritual aspects of the cycle. But if you liked this talk and you want to know more about the other seasons, come to Free to Flow. So because you signed up for the webinar, everyone who signed up gets the special rate. We're going back to early bird pricing for those who are here, for those who signed up. It's just $77 the whole day of yoga and retreat and community and ritual and witchiness and knowledge. And you can find out more at this link, ellengilbert.com/free-2-flow, or just email me because I'm going to give you a code for this special rate. And I'm also just going to email everyone who signed up for the webinar with this special rate. All right. That's it on Free to Flow. Thank you so much. That's me. And yeah, we can just chat if there's any questions. I would love to stick around. I'm sorry we went a little over. But yeah, I'm here. If anyone has questions about anything we talked about today, about Free to Flow, about your period, anything at all, just feel free to unmute yourself and no pressure. Like if there's no questions, we can also just wrap her up. Any questions?
I do. Not, I guess maybe just picking your brain. I feel like this month specifically, because I track my cycle, and it came early this month. And so I felt like I was like thrown into it, and the last 3 days leading up to it kind of it went fast. Like I feel like my inner autumn like went fast.
Yeah.
And it kind of like a lot of things that usually get drawn out for 3-4 days ended up just kind of all hitting in one day, and then boom, my period started, and I was like, oh, okay, so this, okay, cool, okay. But I guess just I felt a little like out of sorts in terms of preparing and letting myself start to rest. Whereas, like I was telling you before this, I got thrown into subbing different classes and I've just been running around like an animal, pretty much not being able to take time to rest. So I guess just like in those moments, or I just feel, I guess, still chaotic, so like how coming into the ritual of it, yeah, I
Mhm.
just feel behind, I guess, in my tracking, even though I feel
Yeah.
experienced that I've been doing this now for a
Yeah.
while, but every month is so different, it feels like.
Is that a consistent finding that you have, that every month you have a different length of your cycle?
I'm 30 days, like
Okay. And
always.
how
And
long was this one?
this one was, hold on, let me open my planner. Exactly 27.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
still within the normal range. Um, yeah, so interesting. Those 3 days made a really big difference for you.
Yeah, it like nothing. And then this month too, my like breasts hurt. Like, and I haven't had that since I was a
Mhm.
teenager. It was very weird.
Yeah.
Um it's weird how you think you have a grip on it. And like I felt good and I was ready, and that like Thursday, and then all of a sudden I was like derailed from my plan.
It's another gift of the goddess. This is another beautiful piece of cycle wisdom that we can open to, right? Which is unpredictability, and how do we sit with what we can't control. And I mean, we're talking about 3 days. We're not even talking about like that much time, really. And yet it caused such a huge impact in your life, which is so interesting. And I wonder what the learning is for you, because for me, when that happens, when I have an early bleed and I've been stacking my plate up until what I'm hoping will be my day one, the lesson is I need to shift even my premenstrual phase to do less, because the inner autumn, the premenstrual phase, is still about receiving. Not, we're not giving. We're not in the ovulatory phase anymore. So when we start to think ahead for even the premenstrual, like doing maybe half of what we were able to do in the ovulatory, or just not saying yes to everything, it can help set us up for a potential early bleed or a potential really rough PMS. That can be the result of a stressful cycle or something else. But the main piece, Jamie, that I want to say is we don't want to be thrusting any second arrows right into our hearts and saying like, I was bad, I fucked it up, I didn't do enough prep, I didn't do enough, even like boundary setting, like all the things we talked about today. These aren't things to compare ourselves against each other with. The only rubric we have is how much do we suffer and how much less can we suffer next time. That's it. That's it. We don't need to add any like moral judgment on top of it. Um, because ultimately, like all that matters is what was your pain level? How can we make it less? Because you don't deserve to suffer. But what is your takeaway? Like, what are you intuitively feeling maybe a lesson could be from this experience?
Um Definitely taking like setting boundaries earlier with the premenstrual phase, because I feel like I'm like, oh, I still have time, yes, 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 and then all of a sudden it just creeps up so fast on me, and it's it. I think I don't, with myself how I am. I love the inner spring, but I try to keep it going, or yeah, I try to keep it going way too long, and I like pile my plate. Yes, 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 yes. And then it just comes all, I mean, today I feel crazy. I like, I feel out of control. But at least I don't have to do anything. I teach one of my favorite classes tonight, so I can just rest all day. But I really liked the part of you talking about like resting, it directly correlates with boundary setting. And it doesn't have to feel bad resting, because I feel guilty. Like sometimes I'm like explaining myself why I'm resting, but there's no explanation needed. So I think I need to do that earlier on rather than right now, day 3.
That's beautiful, Jamie. I love that so much. Thank you. And don't forget, like, patriarchy really wants to keep us in the eternal spring, eternal summer, you know? So this isn't something you asked for, like this identification with the pre-ovulatory and the ovulatory phase. Like we are expected to give, do, be everything for everyone, perpetually available. And it's bullshit. So every time we claim our inner autumn, our inner winter, our rest for ourselves, we're healing something in the collective. So let that kind of spur you on in your rest, because we all need that. We all need to see you do that. It's good for all of us. Beautiful. Anything else?
There was a word in there I didn't know on the PowerPoint,
Okay.
and it doesn't come to my mind right now. Yeah, I don't remember, but it was right there on one of your slides, and I thought, oh, I don't know what that means.
Should I
In
share it
relation
again?
to- Yeah, can you go back right there for me?
Yeah. Which, okay, let's go.
No. Nope. Keep on going one back, 1 or 2 or 3. Back more. Again. Then that, nope. Nope. Let's see. Keep on going. It had to do with blood, the actual blood.
Hmm.
Gosh, what word did you say? Maybe you just said it. Either way, I definitely let me see here. No. Okay, I don't see it, but
Okay.
it definitely had something to do with blood, but I'm not on Instagram, but I feel like you put an email out where you were inviting people to look at it. Instagram, where you put your blood back into the earth. Oh, it's one of your mailings. Is this gross? And I was thinking, what gross? And then I got a little snippet. I think you put the blood back into the earth or something like this.
Yes.
Okay.
That's one of the
So
rituals.
there was pushback. What were people? What's gross? Like you actually collected your own blood, or what was the issue with people?
Oh, honey. I mean, this is the witch wound, right? So, like, you tell me what's gross about it, because I don't know. To me, it's beautiful and sacred. But yeah, this is a ritual that I do every month. But I did put it on TikTok for the first time. And yeah, I got like death threats. But it's fine. I mean, more people loved it than, had shit to say. But to me, it's a sign that I'm on the right path, because this is the witch wound. And people were saying burn the witch. Like that was actually someone's comment. And I just had to laugh. I was like, this is the work I'm doing, y'all. But so what I do, I use Thinks, like the period panties that I wear. And so I collect the blood that way. It's really easy. Some people that use like a Diva cup, it's easy as well to just like collect it. And you can dilute it with water, like in a jar. I collect it in my period underwear, and then I put it in a bucket and I fill it with water. And that's all I do, like to collect it. And you can dilute it with water. And then you just take the blood diluted with water, and I like write a song, or I'll say a prayer, or I'll say a spell over it. And I'll talk to my ancestors who also bled. I'll invoke them. I'll invoke whatever spirit I'm working with, the land. And then I take it and I pour it out in a circle around me. And I just say, like, this is my sacrifice. I'm giving it back to the earth. There's a beautiful song that talks about this that I can share with you that I like listen to when I do it sometimes. But it just makes me feel more connected to my bleeding ancestors, to the land, to my own body, like what it means to be a bleeding person, but also just what it means to be human. And this is a very sacred ritual of reconnection, because it's like all three of these things at once. And yeah, I did make it public because I think we need to normalize it. I think we need to normalize the blood, like the actual blood, not like some blue liquid that a tampon or a pad company like pours on their pads on a commercial. But like the actual blood, and I think we need to normalize ritual. So I did share that, and I did get a lot of interesting comments. But yeah, so that's sort of the story with that. Is that it? All right, beautiful ones. Well, thank you for joining. This was so much fun. And yeah, I'm around if anyone wants to chat. Periods, cycles, all of it. Love it. Love y'all. And have a great next bleed, or the bleed you're having now. Jamie, day 3. Love it. I'm on day 8. So I'm like feeling that like tender renewal, but also reflecting on my last period, which wasn't so great. So I'm thinking about now, like, how am I going to have a better bleed next time? So yay, we did it. Okay. Bye, y'all.